让我们掌声欢迎主持人何家瑞教授。Let's welcome the chair, Professor Katia Lenehan.
Okay, hello everyone, good afternoon, and today we have a very special session because we are the only two speakers because due to some visa problems, it's very hard to get visa to Taiwan here. So, but thanks to the technology that we can still be spiritually together. We will spend, we can share their researches. And today we will have the two speakers. They both studies in the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, right? And I think they both are they are from in Kenya, and I think they both are a PhD candidate. And today they are going to share their researches. We are very happy to hear their studies. So the first one will be Father David Okwuma, David Okwuma, and we can move to the page 77. Yeah, and today he's going to talk about the topic and ethic of mutual accompaniment to the migrants. Insights from Pope Francis' social teachings. So it sounds very interesting. So let's welcome Father Okwuma. Yeah, let's welcome you. Please.
Maybe I use my own PPT here because I'm not seeing very well. It's not very visible. And maybe I use my own from this end. Hello, can you hear me still?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good. So my topic is on an ethic of mutual accompaniment to the migrants, mainly from insight from Pope Francis' social teachings, Evangelii, Gaudium. And I have the following outline for the presentation. I have a touch on introduction and current situation of the migrants, and then biblical perspectives on accompaniment of the migrants, social teaching of the church on accompaniment, and then a kind of recommendation towards an ethic of mutual accompaniment of the migrants, and then the conclusion. So in the introduction, the Second Vatican Council invited the Roman Catholic Church to read the signs of the times and interpret them in the light of the gospel. And Pope Paul VI in Gaudium Expels give the details of it. So in a globalized world, as newspaper headlines are dominated by the displacements of people, issues about migrants can be seen as the defining sign of the times. So some people move voluntarily for work, education, and tourism. But most people, most of the migrants are people who are forced to leave their homes to go to new territories when they are faced with serious threats to their lives. And when we are talking about this ethic of mutual accompaniment, we see it has to be a praxis. It has to be a concern that migrants need concern, need attention, they need support, they need care. So accompaniment entails not only providing material assistance and humanitarian aid, but also creating spaces for dialogue, integration, and social inclusion. It involves working alongside migrants and refugees, listening to their stories and advocating for their rights. So this ethical framework challenges us to overcome the prejudices, stereotypes, and even fear. And we have to start to recognize the shared humanity that unites all people. Asia, Africa, America, Europe, we are all humans. And there ought to be that shared humanity among people of all colors. So before giving the recommendation, we will discuss the reality or the situation of migrants, the causes of migration, which will lead us to reflect on the biblical and theological foundations for the accompaniment of the migrants. And then this article will also underscore the effect of migration on African migrants' identity and faith. And then we'll also look critically at the Papal Catholic social teachings on the issues of migration and the accompaniment of the migrants. So the current situation of the migrants. The reality of migrants is a complex phenomenon with various challenges and opportunities. Migrants, in particular in Africa, they face a range of issues, including poverty, lack of access to education and healthcare, discrimination, among others. And so many African countries are experiencing conflict, violence, and political instability, which has led to a large number of people migrating. And there are some factors that necessitate to this current situation, such as socio-political factors. In this case, we have political instability, kind of conflict, persecution, and even abuse of human rights in many cases, which force people to be migrants in other countries. We have economic reasons too. The economic factors play a significant role in migration. So people may choose to migrate in search of better employment opportunities or even improved life. Then when we come to the environmental factors, some factors of the environment play a role also that makes people to leave their home country in search of a better life. So events such as hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, and the rest of them contribute to these environmental factors. I am just trying to lay a foundation why we have migrants in different countries and the need to start accepting them, to start including them, and to start dialoguing with them, because these migrants have also many human resources to be utilized. There is also a factor, a kind of a loss of identity. In an African worldview, identity is seen as a relational or communal identity, which is a must in the interdependence of all elements of reality, both material and immaterial. So a human being is therefore never an individual being. His being is constituted, is integrated in the part of the community. And like Mbuti will recall, the ontological priority of the community, he summarizes it in his famous statement that the philosophical awareness of the individual, that I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am. So the community consists not only of the living human beings, but includes the yet to be born, the ancestors who have gone before them. And this community provides substance, guidance, protection for each of its members. So avoiding disharmony and integrating all forces of life by way of a constant interaction between faith, environment, and society will give a way for good life and even promotes an ongoing formation of a person's moral and spiritual existence. And in this case, I'm talking about the concern for the migrants. We have some biblical perspectives on accompaniment of the migrants, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. And in the Old Testament, the migrants are recognized as human, made in the image and likeness of God, in a situation of vulnerability. So it is essential for them to be given justice at all times. So the Old Testament contains several perspectives on accompanying the migrants. The Israelites themselves were migrants, having been enslaved in Egypt and later wandering in the desert for 40 years before reaching the promised land. So the Old Testament contains many teachings and instructions on how to treat migrants and sojourners with compassion and kindness. For example, the book of Exodus chapter 22 verse 21 states, "Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt." So this emphasis on fair treatment is required when it comes to the approach to the sojourners, to the migrants in this case. And there are some instances in the Old Testament, like the issue of welcoming the stranger. There are numerous references to welcoming and caring for strangers. Okay? And also the Old Testament, we see the plight of the oppressed and the displaced. So in this case, the Old Testament frequently denounced the mistreatment of the poor, the oppressed, and the displaced individuals. They called for justice and compassion, condemning those who ignore the needs of the vulnerable. Even in the case of Ruth, as a migrant, we see the resourcefulness of that woman in the Old Testament gave a strong legacy for the generation and the people of her time, because she was recognized. Then in the New Testament perspectives on accompanying the migrants, the New Testament contains several perspectives on accompanying the migrants, building on the Old Testament teachings. And in this case, Jesus himself was a refugee, as his family had to flee to Egypt to escape Herod's persecution. The New Testament contains several teachings and instructions on how to treat migrants with compassion and love. And Jesus Christ himself echoes this tradition in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, from verse 35 to 36. And he states, "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. A stranger, you welcomed me," and so on and so forth. So this passage emphasizes the importance of caring for those in need, including the migrants and sojourners, and recognizing that what we do for the least among us, we do for Christ himself. And so throughout the years, the church has remained faithful to this call to care for and have solidarity with migrants of all kinds, and has worked to respond accordingly. So the act of providing emotional, physical, and spiritual support to the migrants, as well as standing in solidarity alongside them, is a critical part in recognizing the human dignity and the experience shared by humanity at large. St. Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, chapter 3, from verse 6 and also verse 19, says, "Migrants, likewise, are no longer strangers and pilgrims, but fellow citizens with the saints, and you are of the family of God." And this New Testament is filled with instances of cases of migrants, that Jesus himself was also a refugee, as we see in the early life of Jesus in that escape to Egypt. When it comes to love of neighbor and their inclusivity, the New Testament emphasizes the command to love one's neighbor. And who is that, my neighbor? Like Father Jude Ukwije just explained a few minutes ago. Who is that, my neighbor? We got to pick interest in one another. We got to be concerned for one another. So it is also there in the parable of the Good Samaritan. I will not be going there again. There is also the care for the vulnerable and the marginalized. The New Testament repeatedly calls for the care and support of the vulnerable and marginalized. Most of them are migrants. And this includes individuals who may be displaced or in need of assistance, such as widows, orphans, and the poor. The Epistle of St. James, for example, emphasizes the importance of practical acts of compassion and justice towards those in need. It states that true religion includes visiting orphans and widows in their distress. We now have to go to the Catholic social teaching on accompaniment of the migrants. And so the call to accompany migrants is rooted in Catholic social teaching. Accompaniment in this context calls us to serve, to support, to assist, and to advocate with and for migrants from the start of their migration experience to its end. So accompaniment in this regard encourages a greater mutual understanding of migration challenges as well as formation and migrant leadership opportunities for directly impacted communities and community supporters. So in the years following World War II, the idea of migration started to take shape in Catholic social teachings. So teachings have changed from a primary pastoral approach to migrants to a fuller ethical consideration of the increasingly vast and complicated phenomenon of migration and the claims that can be made in justice by migrants and countries of origin. And so with the reflections, moving away from a focus on the sufferings of migrants as manifestations of sinfulness or a lack of charity, and toward a stronger appreciation of migrants as a sign and instrument of the unity of the human family, and our pilgrimage towards a new humanity without divisions. So the articulation of a theology of migration within the teachings has intensified. And so some reactions after the World War II about migrations gave also rise to more teachings of the Church, such that as early as 1941, Pope Pius XII spoke of a right to migrate. So every human, every individual has the right to migrate, according to Pope Pius XII. So he saw this as a way of achieving a better population distribution on the earth, which God created for the use of all. And in his apostolic constitution, he set out norms for the spiritual care of the migrants. And it combined justice and charity, and in large part, used facts of migration at the time to derive views based on accepted concepts like solidarity, and then the rights of workers, the common good as are perceived by everybody. And then Pope John the 23rd, in Mater et Magistra, affirmed the right to emigrate, and this right is grounded in the right to private property for the purpose of safeguarding and supporting family life. Then in Passion, in Terris, he employed the language of human rights. So Pope John the 23rd advocated the freedom of mobility inside one's own nation, as well as the right to immigrate and emigrate. And he supported the right of asylum for political refugees and stated that as much as possible, employment should seek the worker, not the way around. And so insofar as it is permitted, he claimed that the state has a responsibility to welcome migrants and aid in their integration, inclusivity in the affairs of the nation. Pope Paul VI in Octogesima Adveniens took this further, arguing that not having citizenship should not preclude migrant workers from social and economic inclusion in the light of their contribution to the economic life of the host country. And so various popes in the past have given their teaching on the need to accommodate migrants, give them a place, and also offer them opportunities to give their contributions to the society, even as justice is also extended to them. And I will now go to the Evangelii Gaudium on the migrants. First of all, we know that Pope Francis makes it a priority in his teaching about the concern for the migrants. So while it is true that migration often reveals failures and shortcomings on the part of states and the international community, they also point to the aspiration of humanity to enjoy a unity that is marked by respect for differences, by attitudes of acceptance and hospitality, which enable an equitable sharing of the world's goods, and by the protection and advancement of the dignity and centrality of every human person. So from the Christian standpoint, the reality of migration, like other human realities, points to the tension between the beauty of creation, marked by grace and redemption, and the mystery of sin. So the solidarity we are talking about here, solidarity, acceptance, and signs of fraternity and understanding, exist side by side with rejection, discrimination, trafficking, exploitation, and suffering and death. So Pope Francis seeks to reframe the discussion of migrants in terms of building a better world. He calls us to see and to enable others to see migrants and refugees not as a problem to be solved, but as sisters and brothers to be welcomed, respected, and loved. So for Pope Francis, they do not present an imposition, rather they present an opportunity for us to contribute to building a better world. So in this document, Evangelii Gaudium, written by Pope Francis in 2013, outlines his vision for the renewal of the Catholic Church and the mission of the Church in the world. So in this document, Pope Francis addresses the issue of migrants and the challenges they face. He draws attention to migrants and the trafficked persons as a particular challenge, encouraging a generous openness, which rather than fearing the loss of local identity, we prove capable of creating new forms of cultural synthesis. So he says, Pope Francis expresses distress at a lot of victims of trafficking and calls on the international community not to look the other way, but to have a greater concern for these migrants. And in the words of Pope Francis, he writes, we must not be taken aback by their numbers, but rather view them as persons, seeing their faces and listening to their stories, trying to respond as best we can to their situation. So he emphasizes the importance of welcoming migrants with open arms and providing them with the support they need to integrate into their new communities. Because these migrants, they are foreigners, they are aliens, they are totally alien in the new community. And so they need the members of the community to integrate them, to include them, to accept them. And migrants, we know, are major contributors of the resources of a nation. And so they ought to be accepted and not to be discriminated against. So Pope also emphasizes the importance of addressing the cultural and the social challenges that migrants face in their new communities. So he calls for a peaceful coexistence between peoples and cultures to which each contributes with his or her own identity. In this document, the Pope spoke on how the Lord entrusts to the Church's motherly love every person forced to leave their homeland in search of a better future. And these are the migrants who we are talking about. And the Holy Father has repeatedly emphasized the importance of welcoming, supporting, protecting, and integrating these people. In fact, he made it a priority in his teaching. So when we put all these things together, we see that these are important ways in which accompaniment can be made concrete, not just written on the instructions of Pope, but we have to integrate it, internalize it, and make it visible by the care, support, and the solidarity we give to migrants in our different communities. And when we are talking about accompaniment, there are general goals of accompaniment. When we talk of this accompaniment, the mutual support, the solidarity, there is something that is gained, there is something that is achieved. And first of all, the essential goal of accompaniment is to connect migrants and their families to existing community resources that will help them comply with their legal requirements. It is important that no one stands alone during this difficult and often trying process. And to build awareness regarding existing migration policies and their impact on communities, and then promote solidarity and increase public support for new policies. And these policies will also support migrant families and improve the local communities. Another goal of Accompaniment is to create avenues for education and learning about the diversity of the modern Catholic parish life, not only Catholic in this time, but all religion, because migrant is not only about Catholic migrants. Migrant is about humanity who are in need to live in a new place for a better life. And so another goal of this accompaniment is to bridge the
Father Okwuma, will you finish in 2 minutes because the time is up, right? Okay, so sorry for the interruption. Okay. So just give us some. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I will now go for a recommendation towards an ethic of mutual accompaniment of the migrant. So part of the recommendation is that these people need a sense of solidarity. It borders on the empathy, the support and recognition of the rights and well-being of individuals. And these people also need cultural sensitivity and language support. A lot of migrants are alien to the languages of the community they come into, and so they have to struggle for a number of days, months to adapt to the cultural sensitivity and also the language system of the place. And so they need their support on this cultural sensitivity. Is there a forum that is created to sensitize the migrants about the culture of the new place they are living in so that they can adapt easily? Another recommendation is also on the scale building, the basic need for scale building. Sometimes people may overlook the migrants because they are seen as poor people who are hungry and who have come to seek for food. But within these migrants are various resources that if they are engaged in skill building, they'll be very, very productive to the society or the community where they live. And then another recommendation is interfaith dialogue. You see, migrants is not about Christian migrants, it's on humanity. So whatever religion, there is the need for the interfaith dialogue to accommodate everybody. And so in conclusion, I would like to affirm, as Pope Francis pointed out, that natural law speaks a language that all can understand. And that natural law is the law of love, justice, and peace. And these elements are inseparable from one another. So Pope states that international institutions are called to welcome and nurture these values of love, justice, and peace. And this must be done with a spirit of dialogue and mutual listening. So let each one of us also seek to enhance our indispensable contribution to the building of a more just and fraternal society. And over and above all considerations, it is necessary always to see the migrant as a fellow human being. Most importantly, they are our fellow human beings. They are endowed with the same human dignity and rights as ourselves. So it is only then that we can respond to the globalization of migration with the globalization of solidarity and cooperation. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much. I just moved my microphone to somebody else's applause so that he can hear, because I only through this microphone he can hear us. So we just gave you a very big applause. So I have to say that thank you very much for your presentation. You gave us a very clear overview of the the social teaching of the church on the migrants, and you also gave us very concrete suggestions. I think you can see that the suggestions on page 91, which are very insightful too. So Father Okwuma, please stay online because we are moving to the second presentation, and after the second presentation, we are going to have the Q&A. Okay? Okay. So okay. So the next presentation will be